It's not a matter of erasing our history. It is deciding, as each generation can do, what aspects of our past we want to elevate and emulate, and which aspects of our past we want to say never again. As intractable as some of these issues might seem to modern observers, and certainly as bleak as, say, the relationship between the Black community and the American police forces have been over multiple generations, we really need to take heart in the work of people like David Ruggles, or people who are at the forefront of the Black Lives Matter movement today, in my opinion.
So, Jon, 1830s New York, what was that period like? What were, this is the Gangs of New York. This is Herbert Ashbury. This is the Dead Rabbits. This is a Manhattan in institutional chaos. What's it like, the melting pot of New York at this time?
Well, as one might suspect, it's less of a melting pot and more of a city racked by turmoil over ethnic and racial divisions. I mean, this is the period, you're absolutely right, when New York City is becoming one of the world's great metropolis. It's increasingly diverse and prosperous, and it's growing tremendously in terms of its population, but also in terms of its physical growth. And yet, it's also at the same time a deeply troubled place, particularly for Black people. And that's really what I sought to tell more about in the book.
Now, did this subject choose you, or did you choose this subject?
That's an interesting question. I think it more chose me because I kept seeing references in different history books to this group called the Kidnapping Club, or the New York Kidnapping Club. And they were more oblique references, very short, very passing. And I thought it would be really interesting to delve more deeply into the group and its individual members, and how it was pretty much able to operate with impunity for years and years in one of America's great capitalist cities. So yeah, I think it kind of reared its head, and then I went after it.
Now, how did you even, Isaiah Rynders, where, you found out that he came from a Mississippi gambling boat. Like, how did you even find all that history before? Where is that in newspaper articles, like police blotters? Where do you see that information?
Mostly in newspaper articles. So there are some references to people like Rynders. There's a couple of articles on him, by historians. But, one of the great things about the digitizing of so many newspapers is, it's just kind of shamefully easy to type in, a proper name and come up with all these references, some of them pretty esoteric and long forgotten.
Newspapers.com.
Yeah, newspapers.com is a really good site, but also Redex has done a lot of digitized newspapers. So, it doesn't really take the place of having to go through the newspapers themselves, but when you want to bring some individual to life, it really does help to be able to type in their names and say, oh, okay, well, this guy was arrested in Mississippi in 1828, and here's a newspaper reference regarding it. So,
Jon, I'm going to jump in for 1 second, because I think for the audience listening, you've got the Kidnapping Club, right? If just give a little bit of a quick what was going on, so folks can have some way to engage, really jump, because it's an unbelievable and upsetting, important story.
Yeah, thanks for that. So the New York City that we know today, quite rightly, is seen as this amazing, multicultural, politically progressive, exciting place to live and work. But I think it's important to realize that present harbors a very bleak and dark past in many ways, particularly when you're talking about the years before the American Civil War. So New York City was a place that was very unfriendly, to say the least, to Black people. There were somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20,000 Black people living in the city, And to a person, they were vulnerable to the machinations of this group called the Kidnapping Club. And it really was sort of a loose conglomeration of police officers and lawyers, some judges, professional slave catchers who made their living off of reading the slave ads that appeared in newspapers across the country and getting the reward money for the return of runaways. And it was actually a Black New Yorker, a real hero of this story, a guy by the name of David Ruggles, who calls them the New York Kidnapping Club. And he's the one I think can be credited not only with calling these people out by name, but also recording for posterity in detail in his newspaper that he edited called the Mirror of Liberty, so many of these stories, which I think, you know, without his diligence and attention to detail would have been lost to history altogether.
Was it dangerous for him to do that though? You know, to be...
It was absolutely dangerous for him to do that, in part because the entire legal and political and economic apparatus of the city is arrayed against the interests of Black people. And part of that is the reason why Wall Street appears in the subtitle of the book. Because in many ways, New York City was becoming rich and powerful based on the cotton trade with the American South. And the fact that the cotton bales that were being harvested by the 4 million enslaved people in the South had to be baled up, taken to ports along the South, places like New Orleans and Norfolk. And then they had to be taken to the textile mills of New England or the textile mills of the United Kingdom. And it was New York financiers who facilitated the movement of those thousands, tens of thousands of bales of cotton. And in addition to that general background, the fact that the city of New York was predisposed to the cotton trade and defending and protecting slavery, you also had police officers, individual police officers and judges who I talk about in detail in the book, who really made it their careers to cheapen Black lives and to disregard the basic human rights of Black men, women, and children in the city of New York before the Civil War.
Now, Rynders, you know, he reads sort of like a Bull Connor, you know, sort of character, burning with hatred. You know, can you peer through history and have a feeling of who he was and why he hated Black people in particular so much?
Well, unfortunately, he was hardly alone in 19th century America, as you know, and even in a place that we would assume would be relatively free and open for Black people. A place like New York City was hardly that in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, in large part because of nefarious characters like Isaiah Rynders. And I think he is a really good sort of archetype or representation of the white Irish working class that you know, was represented in books and movies like The Gangs of New York. And those people were very sensitive to the influx of Black Americans from places across the South, those who had risked everything, including their lives, to make it to freedom in places like New York City, but then, of course, needed a way to sustain themselves. And in working on the docks or working in the warehouses or working in the restaurants and hotels of Manhattan, they were competing directly with the white Irish working class. And so people like Rynders were very much worried about competition or being lumped together with poor African Americans. And they consciously fought against any attempt to categorize them with what they saw as, you know, inferior Black people. So it's a deeply ingrained racism in individuals, in ethnic groups, and by extension in the city's larger systems.
So this backdrop that you have, years later, you know, you'll have Jim Crow laws, you'll have things like that, but at this time you have the Fugitive Slave Act. You know, What does that do, the Fugitive Slave Clause, to set the table for what's about to happen in the 1830s?
So listeners might remember that the Constitution has a number of facets where freedom and slavery are under compromise. So one of those, excuse me, was the two-thirds clause. Another instance, of course, was the Fugitive Slave Clause. So that meant that if you were somehow able to emancipate yourself, say, hitch a ride on a Virginia ship that somehow docks in Boston or Philadelphia, and you are making it to freedom, that in fact you are not technically free under the eyes of the law. This is the founding document of the United States. This is not some marginal, irrelevant or tangent stipulation. It's fundamental to how the Constitution was drafted and agreed upon. And so that made northern states, even if they wanted to keep slavery out of their own borders, complicit in the return of runaways. And it was something that I write about in another book that I published in 2019 called Blind No More, where white moderates in the North had to come to the conclusion that the compromise over slavery in the Constitution was not something that they any longer wanted to abide by. So, there's a lot of shifts and changes going on in this part of American history, but I really wanted to try to capture what was going on in this one particular city.
So Rynders comes into that, and he meets Tobias Boudinot. I'm probably butchering his name, and he meets Daniel D. Nash, and this is the heart of this kidnapping club, and they're do you know much about those guys, like what they were? And the other thing is at this time, it's not like now where there's police and you're wearing a uniform. There are no uniforms, so you just be minding your own business and get picked up by these people. So what's the kind of terror and empowerment that these men feel to be able to execute against this dark vision?
So Tobias Boudinot is pretty much the arch villain of the story. He's not the only one. You mentioned Daniel Nash, one of his conspirators. And then they work closely and in concert with the city recorder, which is a guy named Richard Riker, who unfortunately for Black people in New York City is the one charged with deciding whether somebody was free, had been born free in New York, or had in fact emancipated themselves and were runaways under the eyes of the law. So the problem for Black people is that Boudinot and Nash and Riker and the other members of this kidnapping club really didn't care very much whether somebody was born free or had been, in fact, a fugitive from slavery. And you're absolutely right. Boudinot and Nash didn't wear uniforms, so they would prowl the streets, the alleyways of Lower Manhattan. They would walk along the docks, along the Battery and the Hudson River and the East River, looking for potential victims. And particularly before jury trials are instituted, what would happen is Boudinot would arrest somebody, oftentimes on some kind of trumped up charge, like, for example, saying, "Oh, you, Joe Smith, are now being arrested for having stolen a necklace from a jewelry store." And Joe Smith would know that wasn't me, I didn't do that. So they might go along willingly at first. And only when the victim was brought to the police station would the true nature of the charges be revealed. And within a matter of hours, those people could be brought before the city recorder, Richard Riker, declared to be a runaway slave on merely Boudinot's word, and taken into Southern bondage. And this would happen in a matter of hours, really before even the family of the victims knew the people were missing. It happened to children, much to my great dismay as I was reading and researching and writing the book. And it happened to women and it happened to men. And we don't know exactly how many victims fell prey to the machinations of the kidnapping club, But we know that there were scores of people who were in fact taken away as slave property.
Jesse will come back in a minute if I think he got knocked off. Jon, it strikes me as
Not literally, I hope.
No, it strikes me, it's just haunting, and yet we living in a world right now where we're seeing, the horror of our past catching up to us or surfacing, and I think people have a lot of hi Jesse. I think people have a tremendous amount of, we have ideas around these were the bad places, pre-Civil War where terrible things were happening, but you don't think about it in New York City. So the question is, for you, what is the importance here of unpacking this story? Why and why now? And how much of our history must we face in order to really take stock of, who we are and how do we rectify it? So I kind of have so many questions inside of that, but just, tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So I think it's important for listeners to realize, and important for me to note, that the point of this study, this book, is not really in any sense to absolve the Southern states from the crime of American slavery for the 2.5 centuries of horror that the region inflicted on Black people. Through the slave trade, as well as through simple holding people as pieces of property. But it is to say that the nation as a whole is as much based on the denial of freedom as it is on the teaching and the sloganeering of freedom itself. And that is made clear by the fact that this is going on in New York City. And so it's not an attempt to say, oh, well, look how bad things are in New York City. It was just as bad as what was going on in the American South. No, the point is to realize how deeply ingrained the institution of slavery is in the rise of the country and in the rise of its leading capitalist city. So I think it reminds us that the problems that we have today in the United States regarding race and race conflicts between Black people and the police forces, institutional racism that is pervasive in our society, is not a modern invention. And in fact, it has a much deeper root in the past. And on the one hand, I suppose that could lead somebody to become a little bit, sort of morose, that the problems that we see in our society today are so deeply rooted in the past that maybe they're so intractable that we'll never solve them. And I see that kind of pessimism, and I understand it. But I think an important part of the story of the Kidnapping Club is the fact that there were people who risked their lives, people like David Ruggles, who rebelled against this, who risked their lives in the name of racial justice and social justice. And that's where I keep from the bleakness and the sorrow of what happened to children and other human beings here in the pre-Civil War period from being overwhelming.
The guy who was captured that you talk about in the book and taken, could you tell me his? I think it's John Thomas. Could you tell me his story?
Well, there are a lot of just soul-crushing stories here. There's one, William Dixon, who is captured. And I think one of the most powerful ones, if I may, is the story of Henry Scott, who's a small child. And he's sitting at his desk on one Saturday practicing his schoolwork in one of the African free schools that had been set up in Manhattan to help educate, these young children. And on this particular day, the door bursts open to the classroom, and in walks 2 white men. And one of them is a white sheriff, and another is a white North Carolinian. And they have come into this classroom to arrest a 7-year-old child for being a runaway slave, for being a piece of property. And as it turns out, as the story unfolds, it became clear that if the details as they came out in the trial are to be believed, Henry Scott, in fact, had been taken by his father out of Virginia, and they had run away to New York City. And the problem for Black people was that once they were enmeshed, embroiled, caught in the web of the kidnapping club, it was almost impossible to get out of it. As it turns out, Henry Scott's freedom and the freedom of his father will be purchased by anti-slavery activists in New York City, but not before basically Henry Scott, his father, and the Black community is completely terrorized by the fugitive slave clause of the Constitution, which mandates the return of runaways to the South. There's no getting around it. The Constitution is absolutely clear that people like Henry Scott, even if they're 7 years old and vulnerable, were required by the nation's founding document to be returned to slavery. So these events are accumulating scars on the psyche and the society of Black New York. But what's remarkable, I think, and what really inspired me was the extent to which, New Yorkers are terrorized by this, to be sure, but they also managed to establish these remarkably vibrant and vigorous communities all across Manhattan and all across Brooklyn. Many of your listeners will know perhaps of Weeksville, which is an important community in Brooklyn, a site today that's an important historical site, but back in the mid-19th century was a lively Black community. Also Seneca Village, which was established in New York City, but was wiped out to create Central Park. So there are these Black communities where people fight back against the kidnappers. They fight back against Boudinot and Riker and the illegitimacy of a political and governmental system that had made a compromise with slavery on their backs. Basically had made them sacrificial victims to the establishment of the United States. So that's the part of the story, again, that I find particularly inspiring.
George Washington had slaves. There's slaves going all the way back. Is the period, when we're getting to this period, we're talking about the 1830s to the 1860s pre-Civil War, does that grow up from the original sin of slavery? Is it always there in some way, or is it actually worse at this period?
Well, if we're talking about the free states, the northern states, places like Pennsylvania and New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and my now home state of Michigan, we're talking about a fairly long legacy of slavery in the colonial period, but one that was pretty much on its way out by the turn of the 19th century. So my friend and colleague, Erica Armstrong Dunbar, who's written this amazing book about Oni Judge, the enslaved woman who runs away from George Washington's household when the executive mansion is in Philadelphia. And that's an amazing story in and of itself. And it reminds us that even in places that we think of as beacons of freedom, right? Philadelphia, Boston, New York, were in fact, communities that had long histories of enslavement as well. But, what I think makes the kidnapping club so troubling is, in fact, that they're doing their evil work here in the 1830s, long after many of the northern states had done away with slavery, long after slavery had been a fundamental part of New York's economy. And yet, even given those caveats, we see how precarious freedom is, how fragile the existence is for Black people in major cities like New York here 30 years after, 40 years after the Fugitive Slave Clause was enshrined in the Constitution. And all that, by the way, will be rendered even more troubling when in 1850, a new fugitive slave law is passed. And that is passed because the Fugitive Slave Clause says that Black people need to be returned to bondage, even if they might reside in a free city like New York. But it doesn't really provide any mechanism, any bureaucracy, any teeth in the law for making that happen. So the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850 provides those bureaucratic mechanisms, including U.S. marshals and court systems, to determine the status of people in the North. And it's a law that greatly angers not just Black people all across the free states, but many white people too, who had thought, that maybe slavery was something that they didn't have to deal with. They didn't have to concern themselves with, right? This is a Southern problem. It's not our problem. Well, it is your problem when you're a resident of Boston or Philadelphia or Detroit or New York City, and now you're being called upon to return people who may have been residents of your communities, for 2 or 3 decades. So it's a fascinating period of American history, but one I think that we're still sort of discovering these hidden corners.
How do you think, well, first of all, just from the writing of the book and sort of as an historian, how do you sort through, like you were talking about, you had to look at the newspapers and now we're living in a time where people are, we challenge, what are we reading? How do you sort through to get to the truth of the story so that you can really, really create these incredible characters? And how do you know, what was that process of making sure that you're getting the story as much as the truth as we can get to, right? How do you work through that process?
Yeah, one can only imagine how many of these stories have in fact been permanently lost to history. But what allowed me to write this book really was David Ruggles' diligence as a journalist. So he's a remarkable hero in my mind, somebody who might be called the Frederick Douglass of pre-Civil War New York City. And in fact, Ruggles and Douglass met, and Ruggles helped Douglass to understand the Underground Railroad and the organization of the anti-slavery movement. And I learned a lot about David Ruggles. He's not a widely known figure, even among historians, sort of professional historians. And he's somebody who really hasn't even approached the radar of even the reading public, but he's somebody who deserves a much broader understanding and appreciation. And I learned about him mostly through a biography that was done a few years ago by a guy named Graham Hodges, a very important historian and a colleague who wrote this detailed biography of Ruggles, pointed me to this group called the New York Kidnapping Club, and really pointed me to this magazine, this newspaper that Ruggles edited and published called The Mirror of Liberty. And if some of your listeners want to take a look, you can Google the term or use your whatever browser you prefer, search engine you prefer, and look it up. And you'll instantly see how detailed Ruggles is. He's really intending, quite consciously, I believe, to record for future generations what he was witnessing in New York City. And by the way, it's also in Brooklyn, and it's not just the kidnapping of people off the streets. It's also, New York's complicity in the transatlantic slave trade, which is stunning. One of the features of the Constitution stipulates that after 20 years, Congress can make illegal the transatlantic slave trade. So after the first decade of the 1800s, it's illegal to bring African peoples into the United States. And yet here we are talking 3, 4, 5 decades after that had been rendered illegal, New York serving as a very common port in the transatlantic slave trade between West Africa and Cuba. And Ruggles is always keeping his ear to the ground. He's always on the lookout for instances in which enslaved people are being brought into the port of New York, or that ships are being outfitted in the port of New York for the slave trade, or that Boudinot has kidnapped yet another Black man, woman, or child, and brought that individual before the recorder Riker. And he really records in detail in ways that's unusual for the 19th century, and allows us to sort of recreate a lot of these events. But what's interesting, I think, about Ruggles is that, he's an imperfect hero, in part because, he's a pain in the rear end, to be honest. He's a guy who doesn't make nice. He's not polite, like Victorian society expected, certainly it's Black people, to exhibit. And in fact, he even rubs the wrong way his fellow Black activists, people like Thomas Van Rensselaer, or Samuel Cornish, or Charles B. Ray, or other important Black activists who are fighting against the New York Kidnapping Club and operating the Underground Railroad, and involved in the anti-slavery movement. They're even sick of him after a while, because he's an agitator, right? He's a troublemaker. And in some ways, he sacrifices his own physical health, because even at a young age, he's beginning physically to break down and emotionally to break down after these sort of daily battles take their tolls on him mentally and physically.
These battles go on a long time. At some point, there becomes two competing police forces in Manhattan, and I believe their side actually loses, and it goes on. But they are Ruggles may fight them, but they still go on to higher office. So, what happens to these guys? Do you know the rest of the story of these evil men?
Yeah, absolutely. And in the book, I recount what happens to people like Boudinot and Nash. Riker dies in the early 1840s, so he's gone from the scene. But unfortunately for Black New Yorkers, there are other people who take his place who are sort of equally and painfully, willing to step in and do the same kind of cheapening of Black bodies that Riker was engaged in. So, yeah, these guys go on to serve in various capacities. Boudinot remains a member of the New York police force all throughout the 1840s, 50s, and 60s during the Civil War. And, it reminds us how powerful the forces arrayed against people like Ruggles really are. I mean, you've got the legal system and the court system, you got the law, the Constitution, you have the political system, particularly the Democrats in this period, which are the sort of conservative party of the antebellum period. And their control over New York. You've got Wall Street financiers who have every interest in maintaining the ties with Southern cotton. And, this is something that goes on all throughout the Civil War and afterwards. My next project is going to be a book about the draft riots of New York City in the 1860s during the Civil War, but also sort of the broader issues of racial hostility that take place in New York. And one of the newspapers that's published every week in New York City during the Civil War and during Reconstruction has the unfortunate title of the New York Weekly Caucasian. And it's, this white supremacy newspaper that comes right out of the heart of Manhattan every week, sort of pushing these white supremacist ideologies, not just in New York City, but a newspaper that's sent to subscribers all around the country through the postal system. So, it just, yes, it's true that the New York Kidnapping Club is sort of at its height in the 1830s, but you're absolutely right. The stories of the precarious nature of Black freedom go long after the New York Kidnapping Club has dissolved.
Were any of these characters in the draft riots? Because I don't think we even know really how maybe you're going to figure this out in the book, but we don't really know how the draft riots came about and who was behind them. Are some of the same forces at play?
Not the same individuals necessarily, but certainly some of the same forces. So the Irish white working class are also, at the heart of the draft riots, but they're also at the heart of sort of defending the New York Kidnapping Club in the 1830s and 40s. They're the power, they're at the heart of the power, they're the constituents for the Democratic Party. So I think many of your watchers and listeners will remember that, the parties are fundamentally 180 degrees different in terms of their viewpoints on matters like race and racial progress. If Donald Trump had been alive in the 1850s, he would have been a Democrat. It's the Democratic Party that is at the forefront of defending slavery. And they're the ones who really have control of New York City's politics, primarily through Tammany Hall, which is this sort of political machine. And they rely quite heavily on the votes and activism of the Irish white working class, the same ones who will be driving the racial animosity of the draft riots during the Civil War. So yeah, the threads are all too familiar if you look upon them from hindsight.
Grant's tomb is in Manhattan, and he lived there after the war. Do you see the seeds of Reconstruction, these embers develop into Reconstruction, and is New York a tale of two worlds? Because you have, Mark Twain and Grant there, but you also have these other forces.
Yeah, that's one of the things that makes the city so fascinating. And by the way, for my prejudice and my bias, the 19th century is such an interesting century, is that you do have these sort of parallel developments, and they're constantly coming into conflict with one another. So I'm not sure parallel is the right word, because they do in fact clash quite frequently. But you absolutely have these forces of racial retrenchment and conservatism represented by Boudinot and Riker and the Kidnapping Club, and during the war by the Irish working class and the draft riots. But you also have a vibrant and really important anti-slavery community in New York. They're a small minority. We don't know in terms of numbers how to represent them, but we're talking about a tiny, tiny fraction of the city's political citizenry. But as Eric Foner makes quite clear in his important book, Gateway to Freedom, there were really important committees, individuals, organizations that came together to formulate this movement for anti-slavery. And there were whites as well as blacks who were, crucial movers in this cause. And, they're sort of the ones who are battling for the soul of New York. And what's interesting is, it's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take lives lost and blood shed. But ultimately, you're right. I mean, these forces will sort of take over the politics of New York. But boy, it takes a long time, and it takes tremendous costs for that to happen.
We had a Martin Luther King. We were lucky enough to have him. Do you see, when you see the storming of the Capitol, just, a few days from when we're recording this, a few days ago, do you see echoes of the same spirit, the negative spirit in the Capitol, and are we getting better because we have this is a great test for America. I think we're going to come through it in a way, but it's like this tests the very, very foundations, the same way the draft riots tested the foundations of America. Do you see, is this all a long continuum, your work and what you see?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think there are a lot of commonalities to what happened at the Capitol Hill riot and what happened in the draft riots and what was going on in New York even before the Civil War. And unfortunately, and this is not something many white Americans like to acknowledge, but at its root, undeniably, is white supremacy and white privilege. I think what we saw in the riots on Capitol Hill were representations of the anger of white supremacists in the country who relished for 4 years having a white supremacist in the White House. And they were not willing to let that go so easily because they know because Trump quite clearly spoke to them all over the course of 4 years. Stand by and sort of stand guard. Those kinds of we used to call them dog whistles to the right wing, but that assumes that it's quiet and subtle. These were covert and overt, not so subtle, directed claims to white supremacists around the country, and they knew exactly what kind of president they had, and they are only storming the Capitol because they don't want to let a white supremacist leave the White House. So yeah, there are a lot of similarities, and again, for modern observers, this could make you sort of depressed and view these issues as intractable and insurmountable in some way. But again, what inspires me, and I think a lot of my colleagues who are historians, is that there are always people trying to make a better country, and those are people that we want to hold up as examples. People like David Ruggles. And you didn't ask about the monuments issue, but it's sort of tied in there, as well. It's not a matter of erasing our history. It is deciding, as each generation can do, what aspects of our past we want to elevate and emulate, and which aspects of our past we want to say never again. So, I think as intractable as some of these issues might seem to modern observers, and certainly as bleak as, say, the relationship between the Black community and the American police forces have been over multiple generations, we really need to take heart in the work of people like David Ruggles or people who are at the forefront of the Black Lives Matter movement today, in my opinion.
Faulkner says that the past isn't even past. You said these problems are intractable, and they can appear that way. I mean, one of the great things about the Constitution is that it is possible for all of us to, every new generation to decide on how it's interpreted. Are you an optimist for the way that we're, progress is hard to see when you're up right? We'll deal with the sin of slavery, and do you think that we will get to a better place?
I do. I think you have to be an optimist, in order to keep going in terms of the writing and the research, and keep going with the activism that needs to take place in the present. At the end of the book, I consciously align the book with the reparations movement in America today. And in part because as I was finishing the writing of the book, Ta-Nehisi Coates, the great American critic, was testifying before Congress about the issue of reparations. And even though that was only a couple of years ago, it seems like a lifetime ago now because of the year of COVID and the year of the Black Lives Matter movement and the troubling end to what was already a troubling Trump presidency. But I think at some point we want to get back to those questions because whether it's financial or whether it's some other form of amelioration or apology or some kind of other mechanism that we use, it's pretty obvious when you look at the 19th century and any aspect of American history that the moral imperative for rectifying the wrongs that people like Ruggles and his fellow Black New Yorkers experienced is absolutely there. And I don't think you can look at the past and have any sense of social justice or racial justice without concluding that some sort of reparations are necessary.
Jon, have you always been instilled with this need to, this is a life's work for you? What is it about these stories and this sense of injustice? What drives you? Was it something you saw when you were little, or what pushed you to this work?
Well, I was born in North Carolina, so I grew up in the South, and I grew up also in Florida, and went to school at a college that really was in some ways, even though it was the University of Florida, in a state where you do have these competing sort of constituencies where you have New York transplants and New England transplants. You also have the upper part of the state geographically that is more sort of culturally and politically aligned with Southern Alabama and Southern Georgia. So yeah, I think my parents instilled in me, at least I hope so, some sense of right and wrong and fairness. But, you know, growing up in a region that was so enmeshed in its own difficulties over race was fundamental to my experience. And in fact, the first books that I wrote after graduating college were about the history of the American South, about places like, you know, sort of white North Carolinians, people like white North Carolinians. And, you know, over time, I tried to understand not just the white experience, but the Black experience. And that led me to, you know, what was going on in Northern communities as well.
Incredible work that you do. Thank you so much, really. And for people, please read the book and keep doing the work that you're doing, because it is really, really important. And we need to make sure we uncover this and put it out there for all of us to know and understand. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the kind word about the book, and thank you for inviting me.